Welcome to Christian Answers. My name is Pastor Jeff Short. I'm glad to have you along for the journey today. Today I want to go back a little bit to the Willow Creek Community Church Bill Hybels issue. As you recall, last year, 2018, evangelicalism was wrapped up in a controversy over Bill Hybels. He was the senior pastor at Willow Creek Community Church and the founding pastor of Willow Creek Community Church. For some 40 years, he was an innovator. He taught people how to have seeker-sensitive churches. And so he was a very influential person in evangelicalism. And he was accused of sexual harassment. He was accused of adultery by a number of different women. And this long process that actually has been ongoing for about 4 or 5 years, we've only recently learned about it in the last year and a half or two years, year and a half. And so it's been an up and down saga of Hybels has denied all of the charges against him, and then these 10 women have leveled different charges. There have been investigations, and then people didn't like those investigations, so they had another investigation, then another investigation. Finally, they had what they call an outside independent investigation made up of 4 individuals who are not actually trained in investigating criminal activity, but they're 4 scholars, Christian leaders, Christian administrators, that type of thing, reputable people. And these 4 people interviewed women and talked to Hybels and looked into the issue. And then their big conclusion was the charges against him are credible, which is basically an inconclusive conclusion. So that's where that latest investigation went. It basically says, trust us, we've looked into it, there are some credibility to the charges. Of course, that raises more questions. Okay, which charges are credible, which charges are not? Are they all telling the truth against Hybels? Is Hybels telling the truth? You know, there were no concrete facts given. It was just a conclusion given. And so Willow Creek recently, within the last couple months, had what you might call a closure meeting, and they asked people to come and they would present the findings of the investigation, and then they would try to move forward with the church, put this behind them. And one of the women who was accusing Hybels of sexual harassment was a former pastor at the church, a woman pastor. We won't even get into the doctrine and teaching of the Bible against women pastors, women teachers, women teaching men, women having authority over men in the church. We won't even get into that. But to summarize it briefly, the Bible, the New Testament, forbids women to teach or have authority over men in the church. And that's exactly what Willow Creek was allowing since its beginning. And Nancy Beach was one of the pastors, so-called pastors, a woman pastor, and now she's making an accusation against Hybels that he involved himself with an extended hug or whatever. Okay, so she went to this so-called closure meeting, and she was hoping that the elders and the leaders would present the facts and lay out the case that Hybels is guilty and so on and so forth. She wrote afterwards that she was totally disappointed because there were no facts given. It was simply, okay, the investigation, the outside independent investigation, so-called, concluded there is credible evidence against Hybels. End of story. Let's move on. Let's move past this and begin the work of the church and pretend or forget about this whole ugly incident. And Nancy Beach was frustrated. She says, wait a minute, this is not how you do things. You can't move forward unless you call the people who are guilty to repentance and tell them specifically what the sin was and call them to repentance, and point the finger at the right people and exonerate the right people and set things right before you move forward. You can't just move forward and say, we've done an investigation and yeah, the charges against Hybels are credible, let's move on. No, which charges? Okay, so she was very disappointed. She was wanting Bill Hybels to be essentially found guilty and the charges named and the evidence for those charges presented so that everybody knows that the process has gone forward and that there can be closure now because we understand the truth. We've uncovered the whole truth and nothing but the truth. She was frustrated. Well, when I read her response to the closure, so-called closure meeting of Willow Creek a month or so ago, I thought to myself, yeah, I am sympathetic with her response, only probably the opposite direction. I wanted them to present the evidence against Hybels, and I wanted to hear his defense of himself. I wanted to hear his side of the story. And I also wanted questions asked about the people who were accusing Hybels. Now again, to set the record straight, I have no idea whether Bill Hybels is an adulterer or not. I have no idea whether he sexually harassed women or not. I have no idea. I don't know. I don't have privy to the evidence. I don't have the facts before me. I haven't been able to cross-examine the witnesses and so on and so forth. What you would do in a true investigation, or what you would do in a court of law. So what I wanted to know before jumping to the conclusion that Hybels is guilty, which he may be guilty, and the further he remains silent, the more it looks like he's guilty. But what needs to take place is that Hybels needs to be given an opportunity to defend himself in front of a jury of his peers. He needs to be allowed to have representation. And what that would mean is that the women who are making accusation against him and trashing his reputation and basically destroying his whole character. Let's be honest right now. Bill Hybels, for 40-plus years, was one of the most highly respected Christian leaders in evangelicalism, in all of evangelicalism, in all of the world. He was one of the most highly respected leaders. There were thousands upon thousands, tens of thousands of pastors who came to his church leadership conferences at Willow Creek every year and learned from him how to be a good Christian leader, okay? This man had credibility all over the place. He was one of the most credible leaders in the world in evangelical Christianity. Seminaries wanted him to talk. Colleges wanted him to speak. Churches wanted him to speak. Conferences all over the world wanted him to speak. Now, it doesn't mean that everybody agreed with him, but he was a force in the evangelical world to be reckoned with, and people wanted to interact with him and either ask him questions or learn from him. And he had tremendous amount of credibility. And now, because of the charges against him and the accusations of these 10 women, his credibility is zero. He probably couldn't even get a job in a local church anywhere. His name has been tarnished. He hasn't even been seen in public in over half a year. He hasn't spoken in public in the last 6, 7, 8 months. And he's not saying a word, which raises a lot of questions. You know, if you're innocent and you want to clear your name, being silent is not the way you clear your name. Speaking up and saying, hey, this is my story, this is my account, this is my defense, and so on and so forth. Okay, he has not done that. So it leads you to believe that at least some of those charges are true. Now, we don't know which ones are true. But because he's not speaking up, and he's not being forthright, and he's not being open and honest, it looks like he's just trying to stay out of the spotlight and let this thing blow over. And passively, years down the road, he might be able to write some books and do some speaking, gradually begin to come back into the public light, and talk about this thing. But I don't know what his intentions are, because he hasn't said what his intentions are. We don't even know what he's doing right now. Is he sailing around the world in his yacht or sailboat, or is he staying at his vacationing spot in South Haven, Michigan, or is he moving someplace across the country and going to do something? We have no idea. And he's not defending himself, and he's not writing anything in blogs, or he's not giving interviews. So it looks like he's guilty, at least in some measure, unfortunately. But we don't know which part of the charge that he's guilty of, if he is guilty of anything. What needs to take place is there needs to be a total evaluation of not only the testimonies of the women who are making charges against Bill Hybels, but there needs to be a credibility assessment of each of the women. The last woman to give a testimony against him is the most egregious, and that is the one that says that he actually had sexual contact with her some 30 years ago in his home where she lived. He and his wife rented out a room, or rented out a basement, or rented out some area in their home to cover the rent, cover the payments for the house. And this woman was there, and she had sexual contact with him. That's what she alleges. Now, is this woman credible? What is her character like? What has her life been like in the last 30 years? Is she believable? Is she trustworthy? Is she credible? Can you trust anything this woman says? No one seems to be raising those questions. You have to raise those questions, or else it's a spurious charge. You have to look at the credibility of each and every one of them. Now, Nancy Beach is one of the women accusing Bill Hybels of sexual harassment. She tends to be more credible because she was actually at the church. She was a pastor at the church, so-called pastor at the church, teaching pastor, so-called. And so for the years she was at Willow Creek, she was credible enough to be made a leader in the church, and Hybels at least felt she was credible because he selected her to be teaching pastor, appointed her, and the congregation saw her as a credible leader. So she tends to have a credible voice. But again, her charge is one of the least or minimal charges against Hybels. Her charge, her testimony of sexual harassment is that he engaged in an extended hug with her, which, again, very general, very unspecific content of that encounter. What do you mean by he extended in a general hug, an extended hug with you? You know, was there an understanding between them that they would involve themselves in these extended hugs? Was there anything more to it than just the hug? There are all these questions that have to be answered, and people want to know. Because if you say to someone, well, he hugged me too long, it doesn't sound like it rises to the level of sexual harassment necessarily. And so you have to be very specific. You have to say exactly what happened, and it has to be in such a way that it isn't just a subjective impression. You can't just have the woman say, oh yeah, it meant a lot to him, and then you ask him, it didn't mean a lot to me, it was a casual thing. It has to be very clear and objective that this was, the intent of it was a sexual suggestive act, not just a casual hug. Okay, so her credibility, Nancy Beach's credibility, is very high, but her claim against Hybels is not very strong, and it may not even rise to the level of sexual harassment. Okay, now her claim is minimal and her credibility is high, but what about the woman who made the very strong claim of having an actual sexual encounter with Hybels, what is her credibility level? Is it high or is it low? We don't know. Again, in the age of Me Too, there tends to be this attitude, and we saw this at Willow Creek, we saw it among the leaders, we saw it among the elders that were leaving, we saw it among the staff pastors that left, we saw it among the elders that came on board, we see it in our culture all along, and that is the mantra, believe the women. That is a bad mantra, and that is a bad principle. You don't just automatically believe any group of people. You wouldn't say believe the men. You wouldn't say believe the women. You wouldn't say believe the children. You wouldn't say believe the Americans, believe the Canadians. You don't take a group of people and just say we believe the whole group, because each person is different. Each woman is different. You can't say believe the women. You have to look at their character. You have to look at their reputation. You have to look at their past history and say, are they credible? And then we will believe that woman, because she has demonstrated over time that her speech and her communication is reliable. We can trust her. She's not going to make up things. But if you just say, generally speaking, believe all the women, well, you're going to have women in that group that you supposedly are supposed to believe that who lie, who cheat, who make up false claims for different motives, revenge, money, power, status, whatever. And that's just the human condition. And women are sinful just as men are sinful. And so you can't just say, believe the women. You have to say, let's look at that woman and that woman and that woman. Take every case by case, look at the credibility of each different woman, because they're all different, and they're all different levels of credibility, and they're all different claims. So you can't just lump everybody together and say, we believe all the women, and all of their statements against Bill Hybels are true because the policy is we believe the women, and so on and so forth. You can't do that. That is totally foolish, and that will lead to mischief. It'll lead to false accusations. It violates the principle, innocent until proven guilty. It violates the process of due process. You're not giving him a orderly process to defend himself, and so on and so forth. So Willow Creek is guilty of buying into, uncritically, the Me Too movement's mantra, believe the women, okay? They have been totally uncritical of these witnesses. And I have never heard of anyone connected with Willow Creek saying we really have to interview these women carefully to see if their stories are credible and to see if their character is credible. It's not just their story is believable, it's whether they are believable. Their character is good enough to believe. And so I've never heard anyone really questioning the women's credibility and looking at all of them each individually and saying, evaluating them on a scale of 1 to 10. Okay, how is this woman a 10 in credibility, or is she a 1, or what is the ranking? They haven't done that. What has happened in the case of Willow Creek? And I don't know why Nancy Beach is frustrated, because she knows Willow Creek's modus operandi. She knows that it is a seeker-sensitive church. She knows that the agenda at Willow Creek is to present Christianity in its best light and to remove all the hindrances and obstacles, all the bad public perception of Christians and Christianity, to remove all the rough edges of Christianity, remove all the negatives, and present only the positive case for Christianity. She knows that's what the church is all about. It's a marketing strategy. It's called a marketing church. Willow Creek has been analyzed by theologians. For example, David Wells, Dr. David Wells, in his book, Above All Earthly Powers, and a number of books in the same series, he has analyzed Willow Creek and Bill Hybels, and he labels them a marketing church because they market the gospel, they market Christianity, they present the positive aspects of the faith, they try to downplay all of the hard, difficult, negative aspects of Christianity, negative in the world's eyes, aspects of Christianity, and present only a friendly, seeker-friendly communication of Christianity. Okay, so the whole goal of Willow Creek has always been this marketing approach. So when it comes to a scandal, their leader has a scandal, so how are they going to react to that? Well, their reaction is to get past this, or crisis manage this, or image rehabilitation of their church. They're trying to put it in the best and most positive angle so that people looking at Christianity won't dwell on this negative scandal that has occurred. And so they're trying to get beyond this, move past it, move forward, and put this in the rearview mirror as quickly as possible, like a corporation would, like any organization in the secular world. They're trying, it's a crisis management situation, and they're trying to do this as skillfully as they can. So what that calls for is get past it as quick as possible, by any means, okay? And also, Willow Creek has been known for boiling things down and making things very simple, and avoiding the complicated and avoiding the complex, not getting in depth, not going deep, not getting into theology very deep, and not getting into the nitty-gritty, the facts, just trying to keep things on a seeker-friendly level, easy to digest. Christianity light, that's what they're known for. And so when they're handling the scandal, they're going to do much the same, which is basically, let's have an investigation, let's not get into details, let's just draw a conclusion, let's just bring closure, let's just move on and go forward from here on out, and not really try to get into the facts and nitty-gritty data that some people want, because that just bogs us down and gets people looking at the negative things, and we never will get anywhere. That would be the approach. And Nancy Beach was a part of that. She knows that that's what Willow Creek wants to do. She doesn't like that they're taking that approach now, because she really wants there to be some closure based on the facts. But she should know, because she was there for so long, that Willow Creek is a marketing church. And you don't want to do a deep dive into the facts. You don't want to do a deep dive into the nitty-gritties, specifics of the case, because that'll prolong it, and that'll cause people to talk more about it, and that'll get people thinking more. So what you want to do is to be done with this whole process as quick as possible and move on. And that's the marketing strategy of corporate America. That's the marketing strategy of any organizations in the secular world, and that's the way, the business plan that Willow Creek wants to do here, evidently. If not, then they should do what Nancy Beach wants to do, although it may not yield the same results that she thinks it will yield. And what they need to do, if they really wanted to move on, which Nancy Beach observed, is they need to bring everything out into the light. Get everything, lay everything on the table. They need to interview all the women, and then they need to do a credibility assessment. And they need to lay out all of the points of credibility assessment. Now, one argument against that is saying, well, wait a minute, we don't want these women to have to go through this painful process. They've already been traumatized enough. That's assuming that their charges are true. They've already been traumatized enough. We don't want to drag them through the mud and have their lives dissected and look at their character and evaluate their character. That could be embarrassing. Yeah, it could be. But what about Bill Hybels? He's being accused of some pretty heavy charges. We need to know whether those charges are being leveled against him by credible people. And if you don't do a character evaluation of each and every one of the women charging Bill Hybels with a crime, then you are negligent, and you are basically throwing Bill Hybels under the bus for the sake of closure. And that's what Willow Creek has done. Now, again, he may be guilty of some of these charges. He may be guilty of all of these charges. But you don't simply base that conclusion on the fact that you believed all the women, because that is irresponsible to take that approach. It's irresponsible in the secular world to just simply say, we believe the women. It's irresponsible in the Christian church world to say the same thing. You have to look at all the facts, and then you have to present all the facts. That's what this so-called independent advisory team investigation did not do. They looked at facts, they interviewed people, but they didn't explain their conclusion. They gave their conclusion. They said, well, the people don't really need to get all into the nitty-gritty of the facts. We'll just give them our conclusion. That is such a patronizing approach. That is such a paternalistic approach. That's a condescending approach. We, four Christian leaders, are going to look at all the facts, and then we'll give you our opinion. And you trust us. Because I know you really don't want to get into the nitty-gritty of the facts. No, we really need the nitty-gritty of the facts, because we need to know that your conclusions are sound and solid. It's not that we don't trust you, but you are there for the investigation process, not to just tell us what to think. So the Christian world needs all this laid out on the table, all the facts, all the credible witnesses, all the response of Bill Hybels. How credible is Bill Hybels today? How credible are these women? What is his defense against this charge, that charge, this charge, that charge? He needs to answer all these questions. Now, if he gets to a point where he is refusing to answer questions and he's acting like he doesn't want to go any further in the process, okay, that says a lot about him. That says that maybe he's feeling the heat and he doesn't want to incriminate himself. Okay, well, that would lead us to believe that he's guilty, at least in part. So this whole process at Willow Creek, sadly, has been botched. And they may get to move forward because people are just simply tired of this whole thing. But in Christianity, we value truth. And sometimes you just have to put all the truth out on the table, lay it all out. If you go down that road of charging someone with a crime, you better be ready to have your whole life scrutinized, because that's what has to happen. And these women need to know that. And Willow Creek, really, I'm afraid, they're not going to have full closure to this unless they come out with all the facts. And Hybels may be guilty, but we don't know that now. And it's a shame that Willow Creek didn't take a different approach in its investigating their lead pastor. Well, I hope that's been helpful. Hopefully we don't have to talk much more about this, and we'll see you back next week on another edition of Christian Answers. God bless.